Welcome back to Whispering Pages. If you were here for part 1 of this series, welcome back. If this is your first time joining us for this book, here's a quick orientation. We're in the middle of Thinking, Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, one of the most consequential books written in the last century about how the human mind actually works. In part 1, we covered the two systems of thought, System 1, fast and automatic, and System 2, slow and deliberate. We explored the heuristics that lead us astray, the availability heuristic, representativeness, anchoring. We looked at overconfidence, the planning fallacy, and the uncomfortable finding that in many unpredictable domains, simple algorithms consistently outperform experienced human judgment. Tonight we go deeper into how we make decisions under genuine uncertainty, into why losing something hurts far more than gaining the same thing feels good, and into one of the most quietly unsettling ideas in the entire book, the difference between the self that lives your life moment to moment and the self that remembers it afterward. These two selves, Kahneman will show us, want very different things. But first, let's arrive. Take a slow breath in through your nose. Hold it gently for a moment. And release. Again, in through the nose, filling the chest, the belly. And out. Let your body soften with each exhale. Your jaw, your shoulders, the space behind your eyes. Nowhere to be. Nothing left to solve tonight. You've done enough. This moment is just for you. The 30 minutes before sleep is one of the most powerful learning windows your brain has. What you absorb now consolidates deeply into memory while you rest. So let's use it well. Tonight's book is Thinking, Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. This is part 2 of 2. So let's begin. Get comfortable. Close your eyes if you'd like. And let's whisper through this one together. The second half of Thinking, Fast and Slow pivots from how we think to how we choose. And the centerpiece of this section is one of the most influential ideas in modern economics, prospect theory. To understand prospect theory, you first have to understand what it replaced. For most of the 20th century, economists assumed that people made decisions rationally, that we weighed outcomes by their probability and chose the option with the highest expected value. The model was elegant and mathematically useful. It was also, Kahneman and Tversky showed, consistently wrong. They demonstrated this with simple experiments. They'd ask people to choose between two options, a certain gain of $900 or a 90% chance of gaining $1,000. Mathematically, these have the same expected value. But the vast majority of people choose the certain 900. We prefer the sure thing even when the gamble is equivalent. Then they flipped it. A certain loss of $900 or a 90% chance of losing $1,000. Now the majority of people choose the gamble. We become risk-seeking to avoid a certain loss, even when the expected value is the same. This asymmetry, risk-averse for gains, risk-seeking for losses, is the heart of prospect theory. And it reveals something fundamental about how we actually evaluate outcomes. We don't measure from zero. We measure from a reference point, usually the status quo, and we feel losses and gains relative to that point. But losses hit harder than equivalent gains feel good. Kahneman puts a number on this. The pain of losing $100 is roughly twice as powerful as the pleasure of gaining $100. This is loss aversion. And once you see it everywhere. It's why investors hold on to losing stocks far longer than they should. Selling would make the loss real. It's why people stay in bad jobs, bad relationships, bad situations. The certain pain of leaving looms larger than the uncertain possibility of something better. It's why a bonus feels good but a pay cut feels catastrophic, even when the dollar amounts are identical. Loss aversion also interacts with something Kahneman calls the endowment effect. Once you own something, you value it more than you did before you owned it. In experiments, people who were given a coffee mug demanded roughly twice as much to sell it as people without a mug were willing to pay for it. Same object, different reference point. The mug owners were now protecting a loss, not pursuing a gain. This has enormous implications for negotiation, for pricing, for policy design. Any change, even a beneficial one, will feel like a loss to someone. Understanding loss aversion is often the key to understanding why sensible reforms fail, why good ideas get rejected, and why the status quo has such extraordinary staying power. There is also something Kahneman calls the fourfold pattern of attitudes toward risk. In the domain of gains, we're risk-averse for probable outcomes but risk-seeking for unlikely ones, which is why people buy lottery tickets. In the domain of losses, we're risk-seeking for probable losses but risk-averse for unlikely ones, which is why people buy insurance. These four quadrants are consistent, predictable, and almost entirely driven by System 1. Connected to this is mental accounting, the way people sort their money into separate mental buckets that they treat as distinct, even when they aren't. A person might simultaneously carry credit card debt at 20% interest while keeping a savings account earning 2%, because the savings account feels like a safety net and the debt feels like a separate problem. Logically, paying off the card is equivalent to earning 20% risk-free. But System 1 doesn't do consolidated balance sheets. It does buckets. And the bucket labeled savings feels untouchable in a way that the bucket labeled debt does not. Mental accounting also explains the sunk cost fallacy. We continue investing in failing projects, businesses, renovations, relationships, because we've already spent money or time on them. The sunk cost is gone regardless of what we do next. Only future costs and benefits should matter. But System 1 can't let go of what's already been spent, so it weighs it anyway, pulling us deeper into decisions we should have abandoned. There's a section in this book that reads like a quiet earthquake. It concerns the question of when we're happy, and Kahneman's answer is one of the most disorienting things he writes. He draws a distinction between two selves that live inside each of us. The experiencing self is the one who lives your life in real time, who feels bored in the meeting, warm in the sun, uncomfortable in the dentist's chair. It exists in the present moment and then it's gone. The remembering self is the one who keeps score, who constructs the story of your life, evaluates your experiences, and makes your decisions. When you decide whether to take a vacation, go to a party, stay in a job, or end a relationship, it is the remembering self making that call. The experiencing self doesn't get a vote. The problem is that these two selves have very different ideas about what makes a good experience. And the remembering self is a surprisingly bad judge of what the experiencing self actually lived through. Kahneman's most famous illustration of this is a study involving colonoscopies. Patients were asked to report pain intensity at regular intervals during the procedure, and then asked afterward to evaluate the overall experience. What the research found was both counterintuitive and unsettling. A patient who had a shorter procedure but ended on a moment of high pain rated the overall experience worse than a patient whose procedure was longer but ended more gently. The shorter procedure, objectively, involved less total pain. But the remembering self doesn't add up pain across time. It evaluates by the peak, the worst moment, and by the end. Duration barely registers. Kahneman calls this the peak-end rule. We remember experiences by their most intense moment and their final moment. Everything in between fades. A wonderful vacation ruined by a terrible last day is remembered as a bad trip. A difficult period at work that ends with a promotion is remembered fondly. The experiencing self lived through all of it. The remembering self edited it down to 2 data points. This has a troubling implication. We are often optimizing for memories rather than for moments. We take photos instead of being present. We push through a mediocre evening because we've already come this far. We choose the vacation with the dramatic finale over the one with consistently pleasant days. The remembering self wants a good story. The experiencing self just wants to feel okay. There's another layer here that's worth sitting with. Kahneman describes duration neglect, the tendency to ignore how long an experience lasts when evaluating how good or bad it was. In one experiment, people held their hand in cold water for 60 seconds. Then they held it for 60 seconds, followed by 30 additional seconds at a slightly warmer, but still uncomfortable, temperature. Given the choice of which to repeat, a majority chose the longer version. They preferred more total discomfort because it ended better. Think about what that means. We will choose more pain if the ending is slightly less bad. The experiencing self suffers more. The remembering self prefers the story. This shapes enormous decisions about careers, relationships, medical treatment, how we spend our weekends. We think we're choosing what will make us happy. We're often choosing what will make a good memory. Kahneman then turns this lens toward happiness research, a field he helped build. He and his colleagues designed a method called the day reconstruction method, asking people to mentally replay the previous day scene by scene and rate how they felt during each one. What they found appended some conventional wisdom about what actually produces well-being. Income, for instance, matters, but only up to a point. Below a certain threshold, financial stress crowds out positive experience. But beyond that threshold, more money adds surprisingly little to day-to-day happiness. What people actually enjoy, moment to moment, is more mundane. Time with friends, engaging work, being outdoors, avoiding long commutes. The commute finding was particularly striking. Of all the daily activities studied, commuting produced the lowest average well-being. And people systematically underestimate how much it drains them when they decide to take a job far from home. There is also something Kahneman calls the focusing illusion. Nothing in life is as important as you think it is while you are thinking about it. When we imagine moving to California, we think about the sunshine. We don't think about the traffic, the housing costs, the new routines. When we imagine getting a promotion, we think about the status and the salary. We don't think about the longer hours and the political complexity. The very act of focusing on a future event inflates its importance and distorts our predictions of how much it will change how we feel. This is why so many anticipated milestones, the new house, the next job, the child finishing school, deliver less than we expected. Not because they aren't good, but because once they become the background of your life, System 1 stops paying attention to them. The focusing illusion fades, and life returns to its ordinary texture. Now let's turn to the comparison books, the ones that extend what Kahneman leaves open, or approach the same territory from a different angle. The closest companion to this book is Dan Ariely's Predictably Irrational, published in 2008. Both books share the same core argument. that human irrationality is not random but systematic. Where they differ is in scope and depth. Orwell's book is warmer, more accessible, more populated with charming experiments and personal anecdotes. Kahneman's book is more comprehensive, more rigorous, and more willing to follow an idea into uncomfortable territory. If predictably irrational opened the door, thinking, fast and slow is the entire house. They are genuinely complementary. Orwell fills the lightness gap, Kahneman fills the rigor gap. But if you can only read one, read Kahneman. The second book worth pairing with this one is Nudge, by Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein. Thaler won the Nobel Prize in Economics partly for building on Kahneman and Tversky's work. He took the behavioral findings and asked, what do we do with them? Nudge is the answer. If thinking, fast and slow is the diagnosis, nudge is the treatment. It argues that by redesigning the architecture of choices, the defaults, the ordering, the framing, we can steer people toward better decisions without removing their freedom. Organ donation opt-out systems, automatic pension enrollment, cafeteria layouts that put fruit at eye level, these are nudges. They acknowledge that System 1 is running the show and design around it rather than fighting it. Kahneman tells you why people make the choices they make. Thaler and Sunstein tell you how to use that knowledge constructively. Now, where does thinking, fast and slow fall short? The first limitation is structure. This is a large book covering an enormous amount of ground: heuristics, biases, prospect theory, happiness research, expert judgment, and the connections between sections are sometimes loose. It reads less like a single argument than a collection of related discoveries, and some readers find that the second half feels like a different book grafted onto the first. Second, the book leans heavily on laboratory experiments. Many of these findings have faced replication challenges in the years since publication, a broader issue in psychology known as the replication crisis. Kahneman himself has been candid about this, acknowledging that some specific effects he wrote about with confidence have since proven more fragile than originally thought. The core framework of System 1 and System 2 remains widely accepted, but some of the specific biases described in the book are on firmer ground than others. Third, the book offers relatively little guidance on what to actually do differently. Knowing that you're susceptible to anchoring, or that your remembering self-distorts your evaluations, is genuinely useful as a starting point. But the gap between intellectual awareness and behavioral change is wide, and Kahneman doesn't spend much time bridging it. For readers who want actionable strategies, this book is a foundation, not a manual. None of these limitations diminish what this book is. It is a life's work, the distillation of 50 years of research by one of the most rigorous and curious minds in the history of behavioral science. It earned the Nobel Prize. It changed how economists, psychologists, policymakers, and investors think about human decision-making. And it will almost certainly change how you think about your own. The questions it leaves you with are the right ones. Not just how do I make better decisions, but what does it mean to make a good one? If my remembering self and my experiencing self want different things, which one should win? If I know my predictions are systematically biased, how do I correct for biases I can't see? There are no clean answers. But asking the questions clearly is already more than most books manage. Let's bring it together into a few ideas you can actually carry with you. The first is about loss aversion. The next time you're facing a decision and you feel strong resistance, a reluctance to sell, to quit, to change course, to give something up, ask yourself whether you're responding to the actual future or to the pain of letting go. The sunk cost has already been spent. What matters now is only what comes next. Loss aversion is real and deeply wired, but it is not a reliable guide to good decisions. Noticing it is the first step to not being ruled by it. The second is about the peak end rule. If you're designing an experience for others, a meeting, a customer interaction, a difficult conversation, even a dinner party, pay disproportionate attention to how it ends. The ending is what gets remembered. A hard conversation that closes with warmth is remembered differently than one that ends in silence. A client experience that finishes with a problem cleanly resolved feels better than one that was smooth throughout but ended with a small glitch. This isn't manipulation. It's understanding how memory actually works and choosing to design around it. The third is about the focusing illusion. Before you make a major life decision, a move, a career change, a big purchase, ask yourself honestly, how much of my life will this actually touch, day to day, once the novelty fades? Most big changes affect a smaller portion of daily experience than we imagine when we're fully focused on them. The new house will become the background. The commute will become the price of Monday. The new job will become work. This doesn't mean change is bad. It means you should be clear-eyed about what you're actually buying, and not bank on it transforming how you feel in 6 months. The fourth is about the two selves. Pay attention to the gap between what your remembering self is chasing and what your experiencing self is actually living. If you're consistently sacrificing present moments for a better story, working through vacations, skipping rest, staying in situations long past their usefulness, it's worth asking who you're optimizing for. The self who will narrate this later, or the self who has to live it now. Neither answer is automatically right. But asking the question is something most people never do. There's also something practical you can take from Kahneman's research on expert judgment. Wherever you're making consequential decisions in a domain with delayed and noisy feedback, hiring, investing, forecasting, be skeptical of your intuition. Not because intuition is worthless, but because in those environments, the data that shaped your intuition may be misleading. Use checklists. Seek the outside view. Ask what the base rate is for situations like this one. Find someone who doesn't share your enthusiasm and ask them to argue against the decision. These are not signs of weakness. They are signs of having read Kahneman. And finally, the goal is not to become a different kind of thinker overnight. System 1 will still run the show tomorrow. You will still anchor, still be swayed by vivid stories, still feel losses more sharply than gains. That is not failure. That is human. The goal is a small but meaningful shift in the moments that matter most, to pause before a major hire, a major investment, a major commitment, and ask, what is my system 1 telling me, and what does the outside view actually suggest? That pause is the art, and it is available to anyone willing to practice it. There's one final thought worth carrying into sleep tonight. Daniel Kahneman spent his career studying the ways the mind fails. Biases, illusions, errors, systematic, predictable mistakes. And you might think that a life spent cataloging human fallibility would leave a person cynical or despairing about our capacity for reason. But what comes through in this book, quietly, consistently, is something closer to the opposite. A kind of deep respect for the difficulty of being a thinking creature. We are animals who evolved to survive, not to calculate. System 1 is not a bug in the human operating system. It is the operating system. And it is remarkable in what it can do: pattern recognition, emotional attunement, rapid response, creative leaping. What Kahneman asks of us is not perfection. It is something more modest and more achievable, a little more humility about our certainties, a little more curiosity about our blind spots, and a willingness to slow down, just occasionally, in the places where it matters, to let System 2 do the work it was built for. You already know more tonight than you did this morning about why you think the way you do. Let that settle in while you rest. This has been part 2 of our series on thinking, fast and slow. If you missed part 1, it's waiting for you, covering the System 1 and 2 framework, heuristics, the planning fallacy, and the surprising limits of expert judgment. Sleep well. We'll see you at Whispering Pages for the next one.